Hey friends, my name is Tim and this is my Queen Anthurium. I bought this from Flora Fauna in Atlanta in October of 2021. So it's just over 4.5 years old, and I'll pop up a picture of what it looked like when I first got it because it was just a tiny little seed-grown propagation from Rousseau Plant Care. But it's been doing great ever since. And in this video, I wanted to kind of dive into repotting an Anthurium of this size and going over my soil mix and what I look for when it's time to repot, and just kind of some tips and tricks on all of that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I knew it was time to repot this Queen Anthurium. And the first thing you'll notice is it's just very difficult to keep the plant hydrated. And what I mean by that is you can see this leaf has started to yellow pretty much all over from the bottom up. I've gotten pretty good at noticing when it's an underwatering issue, and this is what that leaf would look like. The oldest leaf will start to yellow from the bottom up. So the way that I water this is I keep it in a deep dish, and then I put the pot on pot risers so that I can just water all the way through. If the water rise is high enough to get to the drainage holes, it can soak some of that water back up into the soil. But what I noticed was, even though I was watering this every day, every morning I'd go in, the top of the soil would be rock hard, the pot would be extremely light, and it was time to water again, and the leaves were still yellowing. So that was the first sign that this plant is not able to get the amount of water it needs or retain the amount of water around its roots to be happy. So another reason that we'd want to repot this particular plant is because the amount of stem that's showing here that could be beneficial to the plant. It's sending out dozens of aerial root nodes, and these are just waiting for humidity. Typically, this is going to be growing up a tree in the Amazon, and it would be exposed to consistent rain and humidity, and these roots would wrap around the tree, and then they'd bring in nutrients from the water cascading down, and that would help this grow bigger. But because we're in a household, that's not the case. So these need to be covered in soil so that they can stay humid. It'll complete a feedback loop to the plant that says, hey, this part of the stem is now stabilized, it's holding on to something, and it's bringing in water and nutrients. We can start to put out some bigger leaves. So in the pot up, I'm going to be covering this stem to here with soil. I wanted to talk about what to look for in the next size up for a pot. If you see a pot that looks like it's going to be the perfect one for a plant you have in mind, even if it's a year before you need it, buy it, because I guarantee when you actually need it, you're going to go back and it won't be there anymore. So when I saw this one, I grabbed it because it's the exact pot that I need. And what I was looking for was to have an extra inch around the entire circumference of the old pot. And then when I put it up next to it, you can see this pot is raised about 1.5 inches off of the table here with some risers. So I know I've got 1.5 inches below where the roots are going to be able to grow. But then also the top of the pot goes across, and it's right at where I want the soil line to be on this plant when I repot it. So what I want to do is take this 4 to 5 inches of stem and completely cover it in soil so that all of those aerial root nodes can send out roots. Now there's a little bit of prep that I like to do on a pot before I use it. For the first time, I'll wash it out just because you never know what might be in there, what might still be lingering around. And I definitely wouldn't want any old dirt in my new dirt. So the next thing I do is cut up a couple of little squares from this crochet mesh. You can get these at any craft store. It's like 99 cents for a sheet. And I just put those over the drainage holes. You'll get a lot more mileage out of your soil if it's not washing out every time you water your plant. So for my soil mix, I've tried all kinds of different brands out there, and what I found is I really just like to make my own. And what I use is I'll start out with a base of chunky orchid mix from Soul Soil. It says it comes with chunky perlite, coconut husk, and pine bark. And you can see when I show you, the perlite in this is really chunky. I mean, some of them are 1 inch in diameter. So I'll mix that 1-to-1 with Fox Farm soil. And then I like to throw in a couple handfuls of charcoal. I imagine that there is charcoal out there in nature where these plants are, because if you think about it, charcoal is just burnt tree and forests catch on fire. So there's going to be some charcoal wherever you find anthuriums. And then the last thing I've got here is just a kelp spray. And I like to put this on the roots as soon as I pull it out of the pot, because we all know that plants hate to be repotted. The roots don't like to be exposed to air or light. And I've just found that this adds a protective barrier on those roots for the short time that it's exposed to all of the elements. And what I found is that if the plant's putting out a spear or the roots are growing really nicely, this helps it not skip a beat. Versus if I don't use kelp mist, typically the plant kind of slows down in growth for a period while it's trying to get reestablished with those roots. And if it's putting out a leaf, sometimes the leaf will crisp up and die off. So I've found that the kelp mist is just a little extra thing you can do when you're repotting, and I've had great results with it. So I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like when we mix up this soil so you can get an idea of what yours should look like. We're going to be making 2 gallons of this. We're going to start off with 1 gallon of the Orchid Chunky Mix from Soul Soil. And you can see just how chunky some of this perlite is. So that's what I like to see. We'll kind of mix some of that up, and you can kind of get an idea of what this soil looks like before we add the fox farm. So we've got 1 gallon of that. And then we'll add in 1 gallon of our fox farm. I like to mix these two together first and then add the charcoal as I see fit. And you can kind of see even right here where some of the pine bark has already started to char. I don't know what happened there. I guess it got burnt on the blade when they were cutting it. I've always found that mixing by hand is my favorite way. Some people like to use those bougie little scoops, but my hands work just as good, I'd think. So you can see it's not clumping together. We're going to be getting a lot of aeration from the chunky perlite and the pine bark in there. And that's what you want. You want to allow for big pockets of chunky soil where the roots can kind of grow around and not get compacted with that really hard soil like you get on the top when it's time to repot. So this is about good. I'm going to go ahead and add the charcoal in there. You see, this is just a little bit of charcoal that we're going to mix in there for good measure. And you can see this is what our soil looks like. That is good to go. I do love listening to the sound of all the large, chunky parts of the soil crashing into each other. It's just a little click, pop, click, pop. So now it's time to repot. And what I like to do is just put it in the same container because a lot of this soil is going to get everywhere when you pull it out. And what I like to do is just kind of go around and see if I can't get this plant out of the pot, but typically on a larger plant like this, it might be a little difficult to get it out of there. And you just have to realize when it's time to cut your losses and just cut the pot away for the sake of the plant. Yeah, this one's not gonna budge, and I know better, so I'm going to go ahead and cut the pot and make my life a lot easier here. I'm using some mixed media shears that are used for cutting really thick material, and it makes a real breeze of cutting through these thick pots. We can really loosen this up. I can't stress it enough. Sometimes it's just not worth risking the plant to save a $4 or $5 pot. There we go. All right, so now that that's out, what I want to do is immediately spray this with kelp mist so that those roots are not exposed to any more oxygen than they have to be. You also want to make sure you get the bottom you can see these roots are not too root bound, but definitely root bound enough that they're ready for a new pot. So I'm going to put that back in its original pot. And what I should have done here first was finished up with this. Make sure your square mesh is over your drainage holes because they might have shifted. And then you want to take care on the first bit of soil that you put in. You want to make sure that you don't knock those out of place. And once you get that first little layer down, they're not going to shift around anymore. Now I'm going to put down about 2 inches of soil because when I water it in, it's going to get compacted. So then I'll just do a quick little dry run here and see if that's about the height that I want it to be. We can see the top of the pot is right where we want it to be, and that's before any compactions. All right, so I had to adjust it down a little bit because it wasn't quite as low as I thought it would be, but we're in the home stretch now. Just filling in that soil around the sides, and then we'll get it around the top. I don't know about you guys, but I love the smell of fresh soil. I love when I go into the botanical garden and you can smell all of the wet soil in there. It's just a really clean, kind of earthy, fresh smell to me. All right, so we've just about used up all of our soil here, as you can see. And that was 2 gallons to get into this. So we're gonna just tap this around and make sure that the plant is nice and secure in there. I'm gonna continue to compact this soil before I water it in. And then when I top off after I've watered it, we will have used all of that soil, and I'll probably have to make up a little bit more to top it off. I'm just trying to get some soil in there between this piece of driftwood and the stem. I don't know if this driftwood is doing anything. I kind of liked the way it looked more than the moss pole, and I feel that when you see anthuriums in the botanical garden, they're typically growing up a tree. I thought it would be a nice little experiment. It hasn't put out any roots onto it or anything, but I think it looks kind of neat. Just trying to get any of those air pockets out of there where there might be voids with no soil. Once you water this through, it's going to do a much better job getting all of that air out of there. So I'll bring you in and show you what it looks like before I water it. You can kind of get an idea of the soil. All right, so this is what we're looking like after we've repotted. I tried to get the stem a little bit closer to the center of the pot, but they're going to go wherever they want to, so fat chance with that. But you can see there's a decent amount of soil in there mixed in with that chunkiness. And I'll bring you over and show you some of my other plants so you can see how it looks after it's been watered several times. Right here, you can see that the soil really starts to work its way into the pot, and all you're left with is that chunky mix. You can see we've got my Repotting up here. Same thing, the soil has been working its way in, and you can also see with my Magnificum over here, the soil really starts to go away and you're just left with this chunky stuff. And this one is about ready to need a repot as well. Not looking forward to that because that's going to be a lot of soil, and the soil in Fox Farm is not cheap. For now, this is what it looks like, and I'll give you guys a video update so you can see how that soil kind of works its way into the pot over time. The real small parts are what you want to keep from eroding out the drainage holes. But I find that Fox Farm gives these plants a really good boost of nutrients, and it's not as harsh on the plant as some other soils with their synthetic fertilizers and everything. So this is what our soil looks like after we've watered it in. I put about 1.5 gallons of just pure RODI water in there. I let it drain into the same container that the soil was mixed in. It's just kind of sitting in that, letting the soil take up as much water as it wants. But you can see that our soil line didn't really go much below the top of the pot. So after our initial compaction, the water didn't really move the soil that much. So one last tip I wanted to give is you'll notice I didn't cut off this flower because it's in full force. And that's taking a lot of energy from the plant. I also didn't take off this leaf that's yellowing because that's going to continue to die off, and that'll be the first leaf that the plant focuses on taking all the energy from before it starts to mess with the rest of the plant, the nice leaves or this new spear that's going to be coming out. And I want to direct all of the plant's energy to this spear. So once that last leaf starts to get really unsightly, I'll cut it off. And then as the spear gets really close to putting out its new leaf, that's when I'll cut off the flower, because I don't want the flower taking energy away from the new leaf. That way we'll get the biggest leaf that we can. So I hope this video was helpful. If you guys have any questions, always feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer. Thanks for watching.